Hey guys, I'm going to show you how I sculpt fur pelts for my space wolves. Here's some examples. So that's what we're going for. I use greenstuff for all this work, and I use just a straight 1-to-1 ratio mix for this particular sculpt. I already have it mixed up here. You really want to mix it good. Keep your hands wet while you're mixing it. I just have a little jar of water next to me that I dip my fingers into while I'm mixing it. And we're going to be using the fur plate mold from Greenstuff World. This thing totally changed my world when it comes to sculpting fur. I was never happy with what I could come up with by hand. Here's an example of some fur I did by hand. That piece in the back, and there's just it's like I can't get it past that point. I haven't tried in a while because I'm so used to this fur plate, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to use the fur plate as a starting point, and I feel like that's what's so useful about this tool. And so what's really great about it is if you look closely at it, there's a grain to it. There no part of it's not just a like if you look at this one that's chainmail, it's just a pattern, and we don't want that. We want, you know, kind of a grain and motion and all that kind of stuff to happen when you're sculpting fur. So take this guy for instance. You want to pay attention to that grain and remember the spots of the green stuff or of the mold, so you can create that motion that goes around. So we have the wind blowing this way, so the fur is pointing down, and it's also going back this way. This guy here, he's like looking off into the distance, but I wanted all that fur to be pointing backwards and just making him look a little bit more stoic. So you definitely want to pay attention to that when you're putting the fur on the model with how it's facing. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And one thing to note, when I do like this, we're going to be putting the fur on this guy. His hair is already cured, and we're just going to be sculpting around it. Normally, I do the fur first, and then, like for instance, with this guy, I did the fur, I let it cure, and then I come back in and I did the hair on top of it, so I wasn't smushing it all around together and stuff like that. So, going to take your green stuff, and for tools, I use toothpicks, and sometimes I use this sculpting tool for fur because I really like the shape of it. I never use an X-Acto knife because I feel you can, maybe this will work for you, but I just don't like putting those sharp edges into it. I like more of a softer, rounder edge, and this I used to go in and sort of pick out and fluff it up and give it more volume and depth. There's one more thing that I use. I took a paintbrush protector, and I just took a knife and carved out the inside so it's sharp. And I'm going to use it on this particular piece, but I use this to cut the hole out around where it's going to go around their neck, and you'll see where that goes and how that works. So we're going to cut off a little piece, pull a little piece off, and just sort of, we're going to get it in the roundabout shape that we want. I want most of it to be on his in the back here, and maybe a little bit up front. So I'm just going to keep that in mind when I'm doing this. So I'm actually going to go for a little bit more, and you can always redo it if you don't like it. You can pop it off the next day, or just pull it off when you're working with it. I'm going to pick out a place on I want all the fur to be going backwards this direction over the top of the model. I want that, you know, like the wind's blowing his hair back and it's blowing the fur back. So find a place on the plate that looks like it's matching that. And the really important part with this is you want to put a lot of water on the plate. because it'll really stick down in there, and you don't want that. You really can't put too much water. So we're going to get that wet, and we're going to get our fingers nice and wet. Make our shape. And we're just going to push it down in there. And another thing that I like to do is I like to let my green stuff set up for about half an hour before I do this. I don't like it super, super mushy. And I've even waited as long as an hour or even an hour and a half, where it's almost too dry, but you can really like force it down in there and get it to look the way you want it to look. And then when you're messing with it, you don't have to worry too much about marring up the surface. So another important thing that I do is once it's to this point, I don't touch it with my fingers anymore. I will use a toothpick to come in and really lightly pull it out of the sides of the mold. I'll work the edges up, and you'll see that by doing this, it's going to give it volume. And if we're making dents in it, the toothpick is sort of the shape of fur, so we don't really have to worry too much about that. If we were to start pulling at this with our fingers, we're just going to screw it all up. You can kind of try to pop it out by moving it, but I like to just sort of work it out with a toothpick. And if you pull it out of the mold and you don't like the way it looks, it's just as simple as mixing it back together and doing it again. So there it is. I think that's pretty good. You can see some places where the toothpick dug in, but we're going to refine this. Remember, we're just using the mold as a starting point. And so I've got this nice shape, and like I said, the toothpick pulling it up in that direction, it gives it volume. So it's important that it's not completely flat. I feel like that really adds to it. So I'm going to pick it up, just sort of slide it off onto the table, flip it over, and I'm going to use my little pusher tool and find the spot where his head's going to be, and I'm just going to push it in and pull away. Maybe hold it with the toothpick. Sorry, the camera's a little out of focus because it only works when I'm in that sculpting area. But you get the idea. So now we have a spot where his head can go, and we can use that to make it easier to work with. So at this point, I'm just going to lay it on the back. And I like to use spit on the toothpick. You can use water, so if it's not in the frame, it's in my mouth. And it's just a matter of pricking it in there. And I probably could cut a bigger hole, like maybe even do 2 concentric circles that are next to each other. But I'm gonna work with this and see what happens. And what I'm paying attention to right now, the important part is I'm gonna try to make contact in the places around his neck and on his shoulders, and that's what I'm gonna work for, because I don't want to start stabbing at it from the top and marring that texture. I'm going to come at it from the bottom and push it up against his neck. See how that's pushing in there? Well, you can see that, but I'm pushing that in from the back, so I'm not touching the top. And I'm slowly forming that seal up against the back of his neck and his shoulders and the green stuff. Push it around here. And now I'm going to start pushing the fur up, and it's going to be a rounded, I don't want it to lay over the top of the backpack. I want it to be like a collar almost. You can, and you know, if you want it spilling over the back, go for it. That's cool. But like, I'm going to start pushing it down, and it's going to start rolling and creating this really big voluminous kind of like fur collar thing. Now this will get trickier and trickier the longer you wait with your green stuff. If it's fresher, it'll stick easier. The longer you wait, the less stickier it'll be, but the easier it'll be to kind of sculpt and get the right shape because you won't be screwing up the form. So it's definitely a balance. You have to figure out what you like and what works for you. Yeah, I'm paying attention to that main shape that I want and looking at it, like I'm kind of holding it back and looking at it and saying like, am I happy with that? It's a little tall. And I'm just going to keep working with it. I like it when it kind of fills or spills down the side here, so I'm going to start pushing that in place. And I'm going to start flattening this out a little bit. And I'm paying attention to where the toothpick is pushing into the fur. I don't like... You can see each individual chunk of fur, and that's what I really like about this mold. And I don't want to start pushing into those, I want to push next to them. And it's going to accentuate those and bring them out even further. With this and fold it back in. Now this is where I'm going to use this metal tool, because I'm going to start pushing a little deeper, and I want that skinnier edge, because I don't like, when I look at it from the side, I don't like how tall that is. So I'm going to start pushing it a little flatter. But too much volume is usually better than not enough, so we're just going to keep working with it and see what we get. And I like to think about the edge while I'm working with this and thinking about how the paint's going to react and where my washes are going to lie, and just, you know, when I look at it, am I going to be confused by where the fur ends and where the hair starts, or where his backpack is and where the hair starts? I want it to look really intentional and separated. I'm slowly starting to pick out individual fur chunks, and I'm kind of just like working it down. Starting to like it a little better. It's looking a little bit more natural. I definitely like the way it looks from the front. How it just looks like this great big thing. But so what I'm unhappy with these marks here. They look like marks from a tool and not like fur, and so I'm going to try to blend those together a little bit better. Maybe give it a, like, use some of those techniques that we learned with the beard and the hair, where you put your tool in motion before it touches the part, so you're not making static lines. Don't exist in fur and hair and stuff. You want motion and movement and fluidity. I'm starting to like that a little better. It was just a matter of not doing hard indentations and presses, but more motion and moving the tool in the direction that I wanted the fur to move into, and giving it little curves and moving those lines how I want them to move. Further defining these fur chunks. I'm really excited to start painting some of these, because I've been sculpting so much that I haven't painted any of this green stuff work that I've been doing. The only painting I've done is on marines that I've just put together stock that I'm happy with. They're not mine, you know, they're not my style. So I'm curious to see what this is all going to look like painted up, so pretty pumped about that. And honestly, I'll sit here and work this for, it's kind of therapeutic. Like last night, I sat there with a piece and just talked with a buddy on TeamSpeak, and we sat there and chatted about stuff, and I just let my mind wander, and my hands just kept going, and I was working on a piece for probably 2 hours, just the same pelt. And at the end, I was just like, man, that's probably the best one I've done. And I didn't really even think about what I was doing. I was just kind of in the zone and feeling the flow. And now I'm really liking it. I think it looks cool. It's a little sloppy in here where it meets his neck, so I'm going to try to define some of that. Maybe go back to the toothpick. And don't be afraid to use this as an armature for more sculpt. Maybe you like the shape, but you're not happy with the texture. And so maybe you come back in, like you could smooth all of it out or push it down in so you have something to sculpt on top of. And you could come back in the next day after it's cured and just put a whole nother layer of it on top. I did that with a big pelt I did on the back of a dreadnought. After I did it, it was one of the first ones I did, and I realized, oh shit, I put the fur is all facing the wrong direction from the wind that I wanted. And so I left it on there and just did another layer on top, and I think it looks even cooler because it's just bigger and badder, you know. But yeah, you don't have to get all this stuff in one shot. You can put it on and decide you want to do something later and add to it. Like I'm not getting what I want here, and I feel like if I keep working it, what I'm doing is I'm pushing it back further into his neck, and I need more volume there. And so I'm going to leave that and just put another piece in there. Blend it in. So I'm going to start breaking up this edge a little bit. Pulling back individual pieces. And I do it by pushing in on either side of the fur chunks and like working them back and forth to give them a little bit of motion. And that'll help break up that edge and make it really interesting looking whenever you go to paint it. And you can set this aside, go have dinner or whatever, and come back in an hour or two and keep working at it. Sometimes the fur is better to work once it's... I feel like that's the best method with these pelts, is you let your green stuff set up for half an hour. You get it on there and you sculpt it into the shape that you want, that you're happy with. And then you set it aside for an hour at least, and then come back and then start actually really nitpicking all the individual fur chunks, because then it's just easier and more forgiving. You don't have to do that. I just feel like that's hell, you could get an assembly line going, start your first guy, put the pelts on all of them. By the time you get to the 10th guy or whatever, then you go back to the first one and start tweaking and go down the line. But who likes to do that, right? Doesn't everybody just work on one model at a time? Still trying to break up these tool marks over here. I don't know where I got this tool. I ordered it ages ago. It's probably just some really common, if you typed in sculpting tool, probably pops right up with a kit. But And I find it really helpful when I'm sculpting to always have a point on the model where I can hold. It's just like painting really fine details. You want to brace your hands together. Some guys, they put their elbows on their knees and their palms together, and that's how you really do fine details like eyes and stuff, where you can then start just doing tiny little motions. And that's what I do when I'm sculpting. I'll really find a place to brace. You have to be careful. So many times I've screwed up a model where I've done like a wolf tooth necklace on the back or something, and I'm sculpting this and I'll just smush it all into the back. But I haven't done that in a while, so surely I've jinxed myself. But yeah, at this point I'm just nitpicking it. You guys got the idea. I'm probably going to come back in. I'm going to mix a little bit more, or I don't need to. I already have it mixed up, but I'm going to push more in and go back into that corner, because I don't like how I just don't like the way that looks in there. I'm going to do another piece around his head, maybe even come back down on the shoulder and just sort of blend all that in. But I'm pretty happy with how it looks from the front. I think that looks pretty cool. Yeah. Thanks a lot for watching. Check out my Instagram. I'll put the link below and let me know how you guys like it. So, all right, peace.